Let's have fun, Siddharth.
100%. Let's go for it.
Welcome, world. Welcome to Professional Spotlight Series, where we do what people. We get inside the minds of professionals from various backgrounds to learn, inspire, and expose ourselves to the valuable lessons they have. And oh my god, how exciting and insightful are the stories. It has been amazing so far, and today is no different. Today, we have got an absolute gem of a guest, an accidental founder. And yeah, you heard that right, accident. He had a whole different career plan, but found his true calling in solving problems that make a real difference. And boom, he started Polybee, a company that's flipping the agricultural sector on its head with robotics, AI, and automation. I mean, come on, that's already mind blowing stuff right there. But that's not all. Our guest is also a passionate advocate of meditation and finding a sense of purpose in everything you do. This conversation promises to be a truly wholesome dive into building companies, finding fulfilling career paths, and improving your quality of life. I'm excited to have with us Siddharth Jadhav. Welcome, Sid.
Hey, Tanmay, thanks a lot for having me. That introduction was really generous. I hope I can live up to it.
Really thrilled to have you. It's been exciting because I've known you for a lot of years, but we haven't been really in touch. And
hmm
I'm very happy to spark our bond again. So happy to have you.
Thanks a lot. The pleasure is entirely mine. And you're right. It's we've seen each other almost come of age in college, and
Right.
then we went on our own paths in different parts of the world. And yeah, I'm excited to see how everything has evolved.
Really curious about your journey as well. You call yourself accidental founder. I'm really curious to know the story behind. First of all, flowers to you for acknowledging this fact because I
Mhm.
feel when you reach a point of success that you have, it's very easy to look back and say, "Oh, of course I planned this all along." But that's not the case here.
I quite appreciate that you sort of noticed that qualifier accidental before the word founder. So the reason why I see it that way is because as you pointed out a few years back, I didn't really have this profession as my top choice when it came to my career. So maybe I'll just give a quick personal background. So, we studied together at BITS Pilani. My undergraduate degree was in chemical engineering. Quite frankly, it's not something that I enjoyed terribly. And it was thrust upon me as a discipline. It's not something that I chose, as is often the case in Indian engineering schools. But towards the end of my undergraduate degree, I knew that I wanted to get into academic research. And how I found out about this was through my bachelor's thesis, which I did at the National University of Singapore. That's how I first came
Mhm.
down to Singapore. After finishing my thesis, the calling seemed very clear that I want to do research. This is
Mm.
I really I really enjoy the whole process of basically you know um, implementing the scientific method, right? Coming
Mm.
up with a hypothesis, designing an experiment, finding ways of recording high quality observations, and then testing your hypotheses based on the observations, and then drawing inferences. So all of that whole process of scientific method being applied to new questions was just in that time very exciting. So after graduating, I applied for graduate school, and this is where I hit my sort of first setback because
Mhm.
I did not get any admissions whatsoever. You know, so because I was so intent on academia, I did not even think about applying for jobs, and I
Mhm.
never regretted that. But I also did not get into any grad schools. So after that, I was still fortunate enough to find an opportunity once again at the National University of Singapore to work as a full-time researcher. So after my degree, I came back to Singapore. I worked as a researcher full-time for a few years,
Mhm.
and that was quite rewarding because well, number one, I was getting to do what I thought was my first calling, academic research. Number two is that I was working on exactly the kinds of research topics that appealed the most to me at that time of my career.
What kind of research are we talking about?
Right. So I was largely working on aerial robotics. Let's
Uh-huh.
put it that way. So that includes control systems, that includes a little bit of physics of flight, and it involves working on miniature drones.
Okay.
Essentially, how can we make novel drone platforms more power efficient? How can we control them better?
Mm-hmm.
How can we continue to reduce their form factor? So those are the kinds of research questions that I got to work on. All of that was very rewarding for about 2 to 3 years, and after that I gave it another shot for grad school. This time around I did get admissions in the US,
Mm-hmm.
but despite getting them, it didn't feel like the right thing to do anymore. So this is where the second kind of let's say interesting juncture came about, a crossroads came about, where I had to decide whether or not I actually want to go for grad school now that I had the admissions after all
Mm.
this time, and I chose not to because it just didn't feel right. It just wasn't an intuitive yes. It would have been doing injustice to my own self if I had gone ahead,
Mm.
despite knowing that it doesn't feel right. So I deferred my admissions, and that's exactly where I decided to shoot in the dark. Is how I put it, looking back, and see what's exciting in technology, right? So I did a lot of MOOCs courses in computer vision, robotics, just got to understand and see what's new and exciting in technology. And this is, where obviously deep learning and computer vision was taking off quite a bit. And I just try to inform myself more about what's out there. And in that sequence of events, in that 1 year where I deferred my admissions, I got involved in some programs at the university which encourage researchers to explore the commercial potential of their projects and skills. And that's exactly where I started exploring applications of our technology in different industries altogether, such
Mm.
as agriculture. And that was more or less the genesis of Polybee, because it started out as a side project in this
Mm-hmm.
quest of finding something exciting in industries that I'd never even thought about, knew very little about. So it was just a result of an exercise in curiosity, to be honest. So that's why I see it as an accidental outcome. It was
Mm.
just me stumbling upon something, pulling that thread out of curiosity, and then realizing that what, this is exactly what I want to be doing with my life.
Wow, interesting stuff. Firstly, you didn't have any options to choose from when it came to higher education, and then you had
Hmm.
options, but then
Hmm.
your conscious decision was, okay, this is not what I want to do, so I'm not going to do
Hmm.
that. Was it an easy decision to make? Did you take into account, you said shooting in the dark, but let's be honest, practically speaking, was there thinking about future prospects involved? Okay, if I go for masters, I'm going to be getting better jobs.
But that's a fair point. It's not an easy one to make, taking into consideration all pragmatic sort of aspects of it. So um, I think the short answer to that question is that I didn't care enough about these secondary and tertiary outcomes of it, because I was just following my intuition, and I
Mm,
felt that whatever, I completely get that I had good intentions of going for grad school, and of course a degree affords you a certain positioning in the labor market, and so on and so forth. And do I not want it, and what am I going to do if I don't have it at all? So all of those questions were real, but the other aspect of it was just trying to evaluate the risk of this, right? Is this an irreversible decision? That's the first question
mm,
that I asked myself, and the answer to that question was no,
mm,
because I could always defer my admissions. I could always apply again.
right.
But if I go now, and if I actually end up expensing that opportunity cost
Mm,
of moving to a completely different country right now when I didn't want to, and then having this massive debt as a student, that was more irreversible than
yeah. There's
having
more,
another
yeah.
crack at it again.
There's more
So
inertia to
th-
that. Yeah.
exactly. So that's why it didn't feel as discomforting
Mhm.
to make that decision, that okay, yes, today I have choice, but I'm going to let go of it because, well, it's not irreversible. If I want, I can create that choice for myself again.
Really cool concept. And I think it's a
Mhm.
nice way to look at things, asking yourself when you have to make such decisions, is this irreversible?
Exactly.
I usually ask myself, what's the worst that can happen? What are the consequences that we're talking about?
Hmm.
And if the
Yeah,
worst is
that's another
something
way
that
to look at it. Yeah,
I can deal with,
yeah,
just go for it.
yeah.
So
Precisely. I think I can trust my wits enough that I won't end up in a worse place, right? At the very
right.
least, I'll end up in as good a place.
Yeah.
But I'd rather find out for myself
Right.
than not.
There's only one way to find out, by doing it. And people often say, especially in this culture of startups, right, biggest risk
Hmm.
that you're taking is by not taking the risk itself. And what I also like is when you're so fixed on the path that you want to follow in your career, you lose out
Hmm.
on opportunities, I feel, because you're
100%.
so blinded by this is what you want. Maybe there is
Hmm.
something else knocking at your door, but you don't realize it. I'm now really curious about what Polybee does. So, what is it that you're building and how is it impacting the society?
Yeah. So what we're doing at Polybee is automating pollination and yield forecasts in
Hmm.
the fresh produce sector. We do this using drones and AI. The main objective of our service is to increase productivity in the fresh produce sector. Essentially, we're enabling growers to grow more out of less, right? How can we get them to increase their yields per unit area?
Hmm.
How can we get them to make better decisions in their day to day operations with information? And how can those decisions actually improve their profitability? So that's the main question that we're obsessed
Hmm.
about, and it's what we're building technology for. So essentially, the way we position our service is that it has two features. One is pollination, and the other is yield forecasting. And these two features are quite independent of each other. So, for example, if you look at pollination, we serve two main crops, that is, tomatoes and strawberries that are grown in greenhouses.
Hmm.
So, essentially, we have a fleet of autonomous drones that take care of pollination in greenhouses of these two crops, strawberries and tomatoes. And the main benefit derived from this particular feature is that the quality and quantity of yield can improve, or you can cut down on your pollination costs if it is being done manually, right?
Hmm.
So there's a whole kind of Pandora's box that we can open up about pollination and why it's such a big problem. But for now, let's just say that we're improving the quality and quantity of yield through consistent and autonomous pollination, right?
Hmm.
So that's for the greenhouse crops, specifically strawberries and tomatoes. When it comes to yield forecasting, that application is much broader. So
Hmm.
we look at a variety of crops, not just in greenhouses, but also in open fields. So in greenhouses, it also includes strawberries and tomatoes. And in open field crops, we also look at leafy vegetables like spinach. We also look at broccoli. We're developing for other crops like lettuce, where what essentially we do is we fly drones to collect data. We process this data, which is largely either multispectral images or visible spectrum images, RGB
Hmm.
images. And we characterize the state of the plant. We look at the weather data as well. And then we try to predict how the state of the plant is going to evolve in time.
Hmm.
And that essentially allows growers to make better decisions on when to harvest. It
Hmm.
allows them to know how much they will be harvesting, and they can make more commercially relevant decisions, such as how much am I supposed to price my produce if this is the volume that I'm getting. When do I plan for my workers to harvest this? When do I plan for the transportation to the supermarket? Right. So there's a lot of decisions that are pending,
Hmm.
on the accuracy of your forecast, which today, by the way, is completely missing as a digital solution.
Hmm.
All
Hmm.
yield forecasts are based on judgment, on historical data, often guesses, and as a result of that, it is a bit of a bottleneck when it comes to productivity, right? Unless you have high quality information, how can you make these decisions better? So we are taking care of that particular process of, number one, collecting high quality information using
Hmm.
autonomous drones so that you don't have to spend your time to collect this information.
Hmm.
Number two, we have built pretty comprehensive computer vision and AI pipelines, which ingest all of this data.
Hmm.
And what we give as an outcome is, or rather, output is exactly what they need in terms of decision making, and that in itself is packaged as a service for the growers. So Those are the two features in our technology. And of course, we can go deeper into two of these problems and their importance, which is pollination and yield forecasting. But our objective is to increase productivity for growers. Like using our service,
Mm-hmm.
let's say they
Mm-hmm.
spend X on our service, they should get a return of at least 3X in their own business, right? That's how we see it. That's
Mm-hmm.
what success means for us. So we're currently serving multiple regions, but our most, I'd say, our clearest focus in terms of geographies right now is Australia and New Zealand. It's more proximate to us, where we are based in Singapore as a company, and it's a pretty advanced agronomic market. And it's very innovative as an economy as well. So it's a great place for us to start. And after that, we're taking our technology to Europe, to Americas as well later this
Wow.
year. So that's on the roadmap.
Really exciting. And first time when I came across what you were doing and I looked into the website, I have had so many questions. So be
Mm-hmm.
patient with my questions because I'm really curious. And I think what you're doing is impactful to the society, and especially with extreme climate conditions. We have
Mm-hmm.
unpredictable climate everywhere in the world going forward. So such
Yeah,
technologies are indeed going to help farmers have better yields despite of the climate changes that we are seeing. So what I want to understand is, you said your focus right now is on strawberries and tomatoes. How
mhm.
does it change from crop to crop? Is it a challenge when you switch crops? How does it really work?
Sure. So for the two crops that I mentioned, strawberries and tomatoes, we serve those two crops for both our features, which is pollination as well as yield forecasting. And when it comes to yield forecasting, we serve a lot more crops beyond strawberries and tomatoes. And we also serve them in open fields. So that's not
Right.
just greenhouses, that's also open fields, right? So that's number one. Number two is that for us, when we consider any single crop, there's a few questions that we think about before even getting into it,
Mm-hmm.
uh, right? So number one is, well, what's the market size? How important
Mm,
is this crop? In that sense, strawberry and tomatoes were a no-brainer. They're high value,
right.
they're highly popular as food products. The demand for high quality produce is only going up for these two crops.
Mm,
And the other consideration was also the fact that a big proportion of these crops are grown in greenhouses. And
mm-hmm.
actually, we were quite keen on greenhouse as a sector to first get into as a startup, because it's a bit better organized. The environment is a little more amenable for
Mm,
autonomous solutions. There's more uniformity there, and more, and lastly, it's where we could see a clear measurable impact for our customers to be
mm-hmm.
made. Right. So I'll probably linger a little bit on greenhouses for a second, because it ties into the other part of your question, which is how exactly our technology can help bolster fresh produce supply in the midst of climate change, right? So one of our key defense mechanisms or production systems against climate change is going to be growing in more controlled environments,
Mm-hmm.
and that is primarily going to be in greenhouses. Greenhouses field crops from extreme weather events. They give you more control on the inputs, such as the nutrition, water supply, and they're also a little better positioned for integrating autonomous systems, such as,
Mm-hmm.
for example, harvesting in the future, where you could grow on tabletops at a height where robots could easily access a lot of these fruit sets. So, in a lot of ways, greenhouse agriculture is the way to go for a lot of
Mm-hmm.
fresh produce crops. Not all of them, but a very good fraction of them. Right. So it's a sector that will continue to grow. It is growing at double digit rates for some of these crops. And we don't see that momentum going away anytime soon. And we want to build for technologies that will be increasingly more relevant in this sector, right? So that's how we picked these two
Mm-hmm.
crops and this particular sector. When it comes to other crops that we are serving, those include the ones that are grown in open fields, such
Mm,
as spinach, broccoli, lettuce. And it's interesting because what does it take for us to move from one crop to another when it comes to building this technology? Well, number one, of course, we will have to have new data sets for that crop,
mm,
because our technology, when it comes to predicting yield, depends on two main sort of characteristics of the plant. One is, can we actually sort of measure the exact feature of the plant which represents yield, right? So that's
mm-hmm.
question number one. And for example, if it's strawberries or tomatoes? It's the fruit, right? Can you detect the fruits? Can you estimate their size? If yes, then that's a great prospect. We can solve for this particular plant. Then the other question is, okay, how about leafy greens, right? Also works because the end product is spinach leaves in itself. Can we see the spinach leaves? Can we measure their size? Can we estimate their freshness based on color? Yes. So it's a good candidate crop, right? So what we need to do next is basically two things. Number one, we need to this is our approach basically. We need to have enough of a data set. Essentially, we need to observe that crop across at least one season to see how these dynamics work in terms of what the weather conditions are, how fast the crop evolves and grows and responds to these conditions, and what is the yield that you end up getting based on these circumstances. So essentially, we look at three data streams: weather, the plant's state, which we do using computer vision and AI, and then also the kilograms that a grower harvests. So we ask them for that information across the season. So that's what it takes for us to move on to a new crop. Now, how does this tie into the broader question of helping growers battle climate change? As you pointed out, with what's going on, the frequency of extreme weather events is only going up. This is making it even more challenging for growers to manage their farms. So what will happen now is they'd have to be a lot more agile in their decision making. And what that means is they need to keep their eyes out on the farm more often and more deeply and more broadly at the same time, all of it, right? Because you want to pick up on those early signs of trouble, be it stress or pest damage or diseases. You want to be able to understand what's the right price, because now, well, to begin with, farming is a very thin margin business. And if you have the tool to forecast yield, you're in a better position to strike a good price, with your retailers, right? Because the way pricing works in fresh produce is it's done in advance. You don't harvest and then decide how much you're going to sell it for. You have to first decide how much you're selling, agree on the price, and then you have to make sure that you have that produce to sell. So the more information a grower gets, the deeper its fidelity, the better decisions they can make, the better opportunities they have to make good margins. And because of climate change, all degrees of uncertainties are going up, and we're helping mitigate that by providing higher quality information.
Wow. It's an exciting business. I never really thought about how this sector really works, and I'm getting some really nice insights from this conversation as to what goes behind, and seems a lot of work, first of all, that your organization is putting in, and I'm sure there's a lot of hard work involved. Does sound like a promising sector with still a lot to explore. So good luck on this journey. What I'm curious about as to the implementation part of it in terms of business. So what kind of business model is it? Is it something that the farmers have to subscribe to? Is it one-time thing, or how does it work?
Sure. So to quickly answer your question, our business model is quite simple. We offer a service, and our service is based on a subscription, as you pointed out, which is charged based on time period and area, right? So the unit of subscription is per year or per month, depending on the crop, per unit area, which is typically a hectare, right? So that's the business model. Now, how exactly it works, can be better explained if we just, take a moment to understand the problem statements to begin with, right? So, for example, let's start with pollination, and then we'll move on to yield forecasting. Who's suffering from this problem? I would argue most fresh produce growers are suffering from it. So if you look at the total farm gate value of everything we grow on planet Earth, it's about $2.5 trillion, right? That's the total value of everything that we grow, out of which fresh produce accounts for about, let's say, $800 to $900 billion, or maybe let's just say $1 trillion for ease of calculation. So that's roughly a third, right? And out of that $1 trillion worth of produce, I would argue that roughly 60% of it depends on pollination of some sort, largely coming from natural pollinators today. So that's roughly $600 billion worth of produce. Right? Wow. So all of that depends on pollination. Most of these crops are grown outdoors. Some of these crops are grown in the greenhouses. Now, one key point here to note is that pollination is of two types in nature, right? Primarily. One is called cross-pollination, the other is called self-pollination. And that $600 billion worth of produce that I mentioned, let's just say roughly it breaks down evenly across those two types of pollination, right? So, for example, tomatoes and strawberries and all kinds of berries and even grapes, I would say, are self-pollinating, which means the male and female parts of the flower are on the same flower,
Mm-hmm.
right? So you just need to shake the flowers up, where the pollen then disperses from the male part onto the female part within the same flower. So it's an
Mm-hmm.
easier or a likelier event, right? When it comes to cross pollination, the flowers can be different on the same plant or even on different plants. So you need some sort of an agent to transfer pollen from flower A to flower B, right? And
Mm-hmm.
that's where it's even more heavily dependent on natural pollinators. So roughly the split of crops across these two kinds of pollination is even, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, most of the crops that are cross-pollinating are interstate examples are orchard or tree crops such as avocados, cherries, apple, peaches, and so on. And I would say that they primarily depend on honeybee hives,
Mm-hmm.
whereas the self-pollinating crops, if they're open out there in the open fields, they get pollinated by all sorts of pollinators, natural, managed hives, wild bees, and so on. But what's now interesting is that a big fraction of these self-pollinating crops are actually grown in greenhouses. Now, here's what happens in greenhouses is that, well, number one, you have only one pollinator that works in greenhouses, literally
Mm-hmm.
one, and that is bumblebees.
Uh-huh.
You cannot use honeybees in greenhouses. Honeybees cannot fly in greenhouses because they get disoriented. They need direct access to UV spectrum. In
Uh-huh.
greenhouses, the UV spectrum is diffused, so they get lost. They can't fly. They are disoriented. Bumblebees are a little better adapted to that,
Mm-hmm.
and hence they can be used in greenhouses. So it turns out there's two issues. Number one, not all parts of the world have bumblebees,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Right.
I mean, in Europe, yes, you can take it for granted. In China, yes. In North America, yes, but not in South America, not in Africa, not in South Asia, not in Southeast Asia,
Mm-hmm.
not in Australia either. So all of these regions do not have bumblebees, which means all greenhouses in these parts of the world do not have a solution for pollination, which means that anyone
Mm-hmm.
who's growing strawberries and tomatoes there is having to pollinate manually or just leave it to chance and see what you get, which is a huge risk to their business. On the other hand, even if, let's say, you're in a region where you do have bumblebees, their activity is quite seasonal. Right. So
Mm-hmm.
now it's summer, bumblebees love to go out there and go foraging, and as a result end up pollinating a lot of these flowers. But what happens in shoulder seasons, right? Let's say towards autumn or early in spring, they don't like to go out when it's overcast and cold.
Right.
What happens as a result is your yields go down as a grower, right? So this is where we found a huge opportunity to build a
Mm-hmm.
solution, because growers are desperately looking for alternatives. How can we make our systems more robust
Mm-hmm.
by having more consistent pollination, right? So that's where we thought about having an autonomous fleet of drones as the primary alternative to natural pollination or even manual pollination, where people have to
Mm-hmm.
go out and pollinate these flowers by hand, which makes it very expensive. So we realized that, okay, if we have an autonomous solution, number one, we can mitigate cost if it's being done manually. And number two, even if it's not being done manually, we can improve their margins by increasing the produce quality and volume in times of the year where bees are not doing the job well,
Mm-hmm.
right? And often this happens to be a time of the year where the price is very high of the
Mm-hmm.
produce, right? In winter shoulder season, that's when you get a good price as a farmer. That's when you actually make money in your business. So that is how we ended up crafting the value proposition that, okay, more consistent methods will give you better yields at a time of the year when the price is high. And our business model is such that if they invest X, they would get better returns, 2X to 3X in that
Mm-hmm.
time frame by improvement of yield.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And not just improvement of yield at any time of the year, at a time of the year when the price of the produce is high.
Wow.
Now, can this be applied to other open field crops? It's a little more challenging because our
Mm-hmm.
technology works best in greenhouses on self-pollinating crops. But yes, there is opportunity at some point in time, I imagine. Now, going back to yield forecasting, that's a much broader application. So we do that in not just greenhouse crops, but also in open field crops. And here's where some of these things might be relatable to you, especially having gone through the pandemic. Which is that how do we how is it that we always find fresh produce on supermarket shelves so consistently? It's
Mm-hmm.
because these big retailers are working with all of these farming companies, or let's just say marketing companies, which source the produce from the farmers. Every single week, they're striking contracts with them. right? They're looking
Mm.
at the market dynamics. They're in touch with what consumers want. They know what the quality specs will sell in their supermarkets, and they make these, clear orders to the marketing companies who source that produce from the farmers. Now, the marketing companies strike deals with the retailers every week, and then the marketing companies have to make sure that they are able to meet those volumes, right?
Mhm.
Now, the deals
Mhm.
are made on a weekly cadence for the next 2 weeks, right? So, if I'm striking a deal with you today as a marketing company, and let's say you're the supermarket, I need to promise you supplies for the next for 2 weeks from now,
Right.
today, right? So you need to know that, okay, so that you give me 100 tons in 2 weeks' time, this is the price. And then I have to make sure that you get that price, you get that volume. And here's where things become tricky because farming is unpredictable, weather is
Mm.
unpredictable. How do you know that you're actually going to meet that volume, right?
Mm.
So this is all based on historical data where you think that, oh, okay, yeah, maybe in the last few years, this time of the year, we've had 100 tons from our farmers, maybe we just stick to that. But often that's not how it works. And that's why when marketing companies that work with farmers make these promises to retailers, they're often very conservative, right? Because
Mm.
they who knows if you don't have it, right? You don't want to lose face to the supermarket because they're not going
Right.
to come back to you then.
Yeah.
So what happens then is often there's a mismatch between supply and demand, and often it's the farmer who ends up suffering,
Yeah.
right? Because supermarkets will find a way to fill up their shelves, but the farmers will lose out on the price point. They will lose out on the reputation of the supermarkets if they don't know exactly how much they need to be pushing out in the next two
Right.
weeks. And 2 weeks is just an example here, but the exact number can change from region to region, crop to crop. But that's roughly the number. So how can we empower farmers to know exactly how much they're producing,
Mhm.
when it's going to be ready for harvest, at what point in time? This is where we leverage computer vision and AI. Our
Mm.
thesis is that if you're able to exactly measure the state of the plant, you literally look for what is going to be sold, be it the fruit, be it the leaf, be it the broccoli head. If you can actually measure its size, if you can actually measure its traits that represent quality, such as its green color, its freshness, and how fast it's growing based on the weather conditions, then you give farmers a trajectory to follow, and then they can make better decisions on what volume is coming out
Mhm.
in
Mhm.
what time, right? Once they
Mhm.
have this compass to work with, they can make better decisions and say, actually, you know what, I'm going to get 120 tons, not 100. Let's agree for a higher volume, because if I don't do that, and if I just agree on 100 tons, that 20 tons is going to go to waste.
Mhm.
So essentially, that information empowers them to make better decisions and improve their profits. So we charge them a certain subscription fee, after which they are able to strike a better price. So that's the business model for yield
Mhm.
forecasting.
That's an exciting business model. Two things that I concluded from this conversation. One, now I understand where the name Polybee comes from. Second, what you're essentially trying to do is help farmers with their commitments that they have to supermarkets, restaurants. You
Mhm.
are increasing their chances of meeting these commitments, and not just meeting the commitments, but even helping them to make more produce so they can overcome it essentially, and
Yep,
help them
absolutely.
financially all throughout the year. One question which is bugging in my head is, what about the affordability? Is it because you mentioned already advanced agricultural sectors of Australia, US,
Yeah.
Europe? What about major economies which are based on agriculture? We are talking about
Mhm.
South America, Brazil, we are talking about India. Is this something that you're looking into?
Yeah. So the way we, think about our market is that as it stands today, our value proposition is more suitable to regions where the economic practices are of a certain standard.
Mm.
Um, and yeah, essentially, it's just the value proposition that is, tailored for those kind of growers. And the reason is that they're best positioned to actually to create that value for themselves by using the
Mhm.
technology, right? So, for example, what is it that our technology can do today? It can either provide you higher quality information more consistently, or it can help you pollinate crops in a greenhouse. And the question is, who's best positioned to leverage this and
Mm.
improve their business, right? It is those farmers who already have a certain standard of agronomic practices that they
Mm.
follow. And hence to them the value proposition appeals, and it's a no-brainer, because they can see that, okay, if I apply this, I'm going to reap benefits of this information because this is how I'll use it. Or I'm going to use these autonomous drones in greenhouses because I know exactly when to increase the yield and what the price should be at that point in time. Now, if I go to other regions where, let's just call it smallholder economies in
Mm-hmm.
agriculture, right? So, for example, countries like the ones that you mentioned, including India, China, Southeast Asian, agronomic societies, maybe to a certain degree, South America and also Africa. All of these regions are primarily dominated by smallholder farmers whose
Mm.
agronomic practices are quite different, right? In fact, I would also argue that their set of pain points are worlds apart from
Mm.
from someone who has a greenhouse in Europe, or for someone who has a farm in Australia.
Mm-hmm.
What are their main pain points? They largely revolve around three pillars. One is access to finance. That's a big problem. Many farmers don't even have access to credit. Second pillar is access to high quality inputs. Can they get access to the best quality seeds? Do they have access to fertilizers? So access to high quality inputs is also quite critical. And then lastly, access to the market. Okay, let's say I do all of this well. Do I have the logistics and transportation to ship my produce to the markets?
Mm.
Do I have a clear, transparent, uh, you know, post-harvest supply chain where I know exactly who to sell to, what price at? So these are the three core pillars of problems that smallholders face. And that's not where we see ourselves contributing, if we
Mm.
have to be perfectly honest to ourselves, right? Because what's our core differentiability today as a tech company? It's in computer vision, AI, and aerial robotics, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's what we're good at.
Right.
Do we see a good problem solution fit when it comes to the smallholder market? Not today. Can we get there someday? Maybe, because we're getting better at gathering information. We're getting better at potentially making agronomic recommendations. So perhaps we might cross a certain threshold in terms of that economies of scale at some point in
Mm.
time where smallholders could leverage it. But I think that's still a little bit more distant than
I
what we
see.
would like.
I see. No, it's understood very well. I think it's not such a straightforward journey for these countries to apply your solutions to them. It's
Exactly.
as you mentioned. I'm excited to know about how has been the journey of Polybee, where the idea came from, what's the origin story, how has been the
Mhm.
fundraising, and where the setbacks you had on this journey, and just in general where you started from and where you are now, and what do you see in the future? What is the most exciting thing for you personally and for your organization?
Oh, yeah, that's a big one. But maybe let's start with let's look at it chronologically, right? So in terms of the origins of the company, so I kind of touched upon it briefly in your first question.
Hmm.
Polybee was largely a product of me just chasing my curiosity, right? The plan was not to start a company. I didn't know the first thing about agriculture, let alone starting a company in the industry. So it was not at all a concerted effort in that sense. But nevertheless, I think the first clear concrete step towards Polybee was me joining this program called Lean Launchpad at the National University of Singapore. So this program is designed for researchers to explore the commercial potential of their projects and skills. And it's inspired by this program, which was first started in Stanford University by Professor Steve Blank. It's quite a popular program. And the way it works is that there are 10 sessions in each week of a few hours where teams are often multidisciplinary, including researchers and business students, and then their mentors, who have to come up with a business plan. Right? It's non-committal. It's kind of a pre-accelerator program. It's just for you to go find out if there's something interesting you can do with your technical skills, or your project, and you're supposed to find the leanest possible application for it in 10 weeks, right? So my supervisors at that time in my lab were invited for this program, and as a part of that, they got started. And actually, initially, I wasn't supposed to be part of this program. But one of these days, my supervisor came up to me and said, "Hey, this is a lot of work. I have research deadlines, and then you have to go perform these, customer interviews and see if there's a product to be built here. Not something that I wanted to sign up for, right? So I said, okay, you know what? Let me give you a hand. Then I joined the program midway through when I was not supposed to. And at that time, since we were doing research on drones, um, I was a bit inclined to go look into the industry of agriculture. And the reason is that at that time, it was being talked about in Singapore, right? Because Singapore was trying to invest more in indoor farming. Singapore had set out a very clear goal for food security. By 2030, they wanted to grow 30% of their nutrition needs locally. And a big part of that was also growing more produce locally, and that could only be done in indoor farms, right? So there was a bit of a
Mhm.
conversation in Singapore at that time, and I thought, okay, seems interesting. Let's see if there's something we can do in indoor farming, right? And then I realized they want to grow fruit crops in indoor farms, like strawberries and tomatoes. And then I realized, okay, but then how would you pollinate those crops, right? So then I started reaching out to these companies as a part of the program, the Launchpad program, and the companies that I reached out to were some of these big up and coming vertical farming companies across the world in the US, in Japan, and Singapore. And I just wrote them cold emails, hey,
Mhm.
I'm a researcher from NUS. We're working on this cool project. We could be using drones for pollination. Would love to understand if this is a problem you're keen to solve. And interestingly, everyone started getting back. I was just being bold. I would slide into their LinkedIn DMs. These CXOs and CTOs of these big companies, and interestingly, everyone started getting back. Right. So what I realized then, I said, okay, maybe we're touching upon a real problem here, right? And then we continued engaging with these indoor farming companies. And I did that even after the program, right? We did the program, the business plan was there, it all looked nice in theory. Um, and then it was up to us what to do about it, right? I said, okay, you know what, I'm not going to stress myself out too much about what I want to do about it. Let's just continue. Let's just keep pulling this thread. Let's see how far it goes, right?
Mhm.
And then I did that. And then I kept, in touch with all of these companies. I started working on my own prototype. Hey, can we actually have a nano drone, a small size drone that can fly in indoor environments and actually pollinate strawberry flowers? And I started building that prototype. I got some help from some agencies in Singapore as well. I reached out to the local Singapore food agency. It's the government statutory board. I said, "Hey, I'm trying to build this technology anyway. Can you help me out?" And they said, "Sure. We'll open up our indoor farm for you. You can come
Mhm.
down. You can do your tests." I started doing that. Turns out that maybe there is a promise here, because the pollination method seemed to pollinate strawberry flowers with the drones. And then I soon enough gathered enough momentum to unlock two new opportunities. Number one, I got into the accelerator at the university, which offers $100,000 pre-seed investment,
Wow.
and of course venture building and coaching and mentoring. And at the same time, I also got soon after that accelerator program, I also got a grant from Temasek Foundation, which is the philanthropy arm of Temasek Holdings. It's Singapore's government-owned investment company. It has a
Mhm.
massive portfolio of 300 plus billion dollars, and they have a philanthropy arm which offers grants to companies and universities that are working on translational research. Basically turning
Mhm.
lab technologies into products and services. So all in all, I was able to raise a pre-seed round of about 550,000 USD back
Wow.
in 2019. And at that time, it was just me, it's just a single solo
Damn.
PI. And that's when I'd gathered enough momentum and I thought, okay, you know what, maybe there's a story to tell here for myself, that I managed to raise enough capital and I had what I needed to start building a product. So that's when I knew that, okay, why would I trade this for anything else? And I started building a team, hired my first engineer out of the university, and that's how the ball started rolling.
Wow.
Um, Couple of years obviously were quite challenging with the pandemic coming in because, as a Singapore-based company, there's not much agriculture here yet.
Mhm.
And we were dependent on working with overseas companies from Europe, from the US, from Australia, New Zealand. So we couldn't do a lot of that in those 2 years. So then we just invested in our own facility in Singapore. We continued to iterate on the product. We managed to get the attention of some of the uh, global agriculture
Mhm.
companies based out of Singapore, as in their Singapore headquarters. They opened up their facilities for us. We did some trials there, got their colleagues excited in the rest of the world, and as soon as the borders opened up, we flew across to Europe for our trials. Australia as well. Got those things going, proved the concept in real world environments, and that's when we raised our seed round back in late 2022 to start growing the product and its footprint, and of course the team as well. And
Mhm.
then we got some senior hires as well in the company, and now there's 9 of us. We're hiring a couple
Wow.
more in the near future, and in a pre-seed round we raised about another $2.5 million Singapore dollars at that time. And then currently, we all in all, including grants and venture capital, we've raised about $4.5 million.
Wow.
And we're primarily serving customers across Europe and Australia, New Zealand, and hopefully we get to the US eventually. So that's been the journey. As briefly as I could summarize it from the very early days and the kinds of support that we got and what all
Oh my
we
God.
had to navigate.
Oh my God.
um,
It's
so yeah.
it talks about initially, I would say, being at the right place at the right time. That was
Mm-hmm.
kind of the situation
100%.
where it all started. Your persistence was inspiring. So you have been persistent with following your passion, what you like to do. And the following journey just talks about your resilience and your strong spirit to bring people together and make them believe in what you are passionate about and convincing them how this is going to make an impact on the society. And
Mm-hmm.
that's helped you to bring people together, join hands with you to make this change and
Mm-hmm.
raising this tremendous amount of money. I'm just thinking how many zeros.
We're still very early in our journey, and but firstly, thanks for your generous words. And you're absolutely right that I just want to reiterate what you just said, that you can come up with all the ideas and the fanciest of the presentations, and you can raise all the capital that you like, but if you don't have the right people on the journey, it doesn't matter,
Right.
right? And I was quite fortunate to have really driven, highly skilled engineers come in the early
Mm,
days to build the prototypes, to prove the concepts, and start building towards the product after having done that. And then also have some more of the senior hires recently from the industry. So for example, our vice president, his name is Pankaj Malik, and he's been in the industry for more than 20 years,
wow.
and he's worked in all the input companies that have been our customers, a lot of them. And he could have done, he could still pretty much do whatever he likes in the industry, but he's choosing to come join us and,
Wow.
be a part of this journey instead, where we're using technology in agriculture because he knows agriculture so well. He understands how critical it is for us to build technologies here
Mm,
right now, more than ever, and he wants to be a part of that, right? So having such folks join you, and when they're giving their everything that they have, in them to make this successful is quite humbling, and
mm.
it's extremely rewarding at the same time.
It speaks volumes of what you're doing. And if I would be a farmer in Australia listening to this, I would be quite excited, mate, about what you're doing. So, let's move on. I'm curious about how do you,
Yep.
in general, at a personal level, prepare yourself for failures and how do you come out of it? I know you have been an advocate of meditation, and I'm sure this also comes into picture in how you deal with the things. What's your approach in general?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. It's so critical to face up to that and acknowledge it for what it is. And of course, it is we are no exception, or personally I'm no exception to the fact that failures significantly outnumber the few successes that I've had so far. If you talk about Polybee, failures are, just prevalent all across. And, like I often joke this to my colleagues that, every morning I wake up thinking, okay, what's wrong today? What's not working? What's going to fail today? And that's how your day starts, there are obviously a lot of micro failures in the product, in some of the customer conversations, where you might not hit the timelines that you want, and you might not be able to hit the targets that you'd set. So it does kind of, it could grow on you in a way that, it might start affecting your motivation,
Mm,
so it's not like this one grand event which, really has you dejected, but It's some of these smaller things accruing that, okay, you know what, start of the year we had hoped that we'd be here, but we're not. The way I think about it is that there are certain failures which can be quite familiar ones. So for
Hmm.
example, if you have a technical setback, often that's the probably the easiest one to deal with, right?
Mm.
Because solving technical issues is like solving a puzzle, right? The answer is somewhere there. It might take long for you to find the answer, but the answer is there. And I think those kind of failures are, at least for me, much easier to, or less difficult, I should say, to deal with. There are the other failures where, which involve more of customers or people or those kinds of
Mm.
conversations where you're less in control, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, Again, the way I think about it is that, for these, especially for these kinds of circumstances where you're not as much in control, we have to remind ourselves, where is that boundary between what's in my control and what's not?
Mm.
And did I do my part of everything that was within my control? If yes, that's it. I need to let go beyond that,
Right.
right? And beyond that, if there's failure, then there's failure. We got to accept it for what it is, because there's literally
Mm.
nothing more you could have done about it, right?
Yeah.
So the reminder you have to, stick to yourself is, did you do your part? If yes, then it's all good,
Hmm. Hmm.
because that's pretty much what you could have done. So that's kind of my general framework to think about failure. Of course, there will be occasions where there were certain things within your control, and then you say, okay, well, what could I do better? Is
Right.
this something
Right.
that could have been done differently? And if there's a yes to that, well, we get to take a mental note and we try not to do it again. If but often, at least half the times, it will be a case of you doing your best and you running into failure regardless, and that's easier to deal with. Like, well, you know, you did your part, right? You got to move
Right.
on. So that's how I usually try to deal with it. And it does take some degree of stillness of mind
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
order
I
to
was
do
about
that.
to say that it's not easy as it sounds, right? You can't just be like, oh, sure, like, yeah, let's move on. It's not that easy.
Absolutely. And that stillness of mind is where I try to pursue the practice of meditation,
Mm.
because it cultivates that stillness and it provides that clarity. You essentially allow the dust to settle down in your mind and see things for what they are. And when you do, it's easier to reconcile with failures. Or also at the same time, I would say, if you have successes, know that, okay, well, yes, this is amazing, this is what we wanted, but this is not it, right? So it's a
Mm.
milestone, we should celebrate it, but there's a lot more to achieve still, and there's still many things that could go wrong.
Right.
So either ways, it keeps you well balanced, right? So it kind of reminds me of the famous quote, right? Like, nothing is as good or bad as it seems.
Mm.
And I think that's what meditation allows you to practice for yourself. So it's not just an intellectual reminder, but it's just how it's the lens through which you view everything.
Keeps you
Um,
grounded in some sort of way,
in
right?
reality,
Yeah.
exactly, exactly.
Here is the
Sure.
thing about failures, right? Failures are the things that you remember longer than your successes, right? You have
Hmm.
major failures, but they will stick with you forever because those have been the inflection points which taught you the
Yeah,
most. And the
exactly.
result of that is the success that you see.
I think, yeah, you're absolutely right. It's just, in hindsight, it doesn't um, feel like anything else but a lesson learned. So,
So, Sid, this is the first time I'm actually doing this. I have a segment now in my podcast,
mhm.
which is a rapid fire. So you have the
Exciting.
privilege to be the first guest of answering my rapid fire questions. Are you ready?
I'll gladly take the honor, Tanmay.
So let's go. Favorite book,
Oof. Um, okay, let's just go for 0 to 1 for now.
advice that you would give to 18-year-old self.
Just chase your curiosity.
Mm, wow. Guilty pleasure.
Waking up late.
A good one. uh, Advice that you received, which was impactful for you.
Um, well, this was from my father when I was about 18 years old, where he reminded me that don't get too obsessed about the destinations. You gotta enjoy the journey.
Mm, that's a good one. One hobby you wish you had more time for?
Cricket, easily.
Uh-huh. No brainer. Coolest thing that you discovered in your startup journey?
Ooh. Um, I'd say how surprising it can be that you could just reach out to anyone on the face of this planet, start a conversation with them, and end up,
Mhm.
I don't know, hiring them, end up working with them as a customer, end up visiting them someday and building a product for them, because almost everyone who I've ever worked with in this journey was just someone who I, reached out to on LinkedIn or
Mm.
on email, and now, we're either working together directly in the company or we're building a product for them. In that sense, it's quite remarkable, So perhaps 10 years ago, this may not have been possible, but yeah, I think it's just really remarkable how you could just literally reach out to someone on the other side of the planet and someday end up working with them.
That is indeed the coolest thing that I've heard. One word to describe your startup life.
Intense.
Intense. Wow. Okay. I'm not sure if you can still call it a startup, or you think you have crossed the
Oh no,
the threshold
we're
of
very
calling.
much we're very much a startup. We're a work in progress. And I think to me, an important first milestone to graduate from a startup to, let's say, a growth stage company is product market fit.
Mhm.
Have we built a product which works repeatedly at positive unit economics, and has customers coming back to us again and again for it. So we need to tick all these boxes, and
Mm.
once we do, then I think we've graduated from being a startup to a growth stage company.
I'm sure that's not too far. It'll be sooner rather
Fingers
than
crossed.
later. Yeah. That was cool. I think I'm gonna keep doing rapid fires with my future guests. Hopefully, they will also like it. I
Yeah, it's fun.
have one last question which I ask every guest. The podcast is called Professional Spotlight Series. So, what would be the three spotlights that you would put on your journey? One
Mhm.
in the past, one in the present that you're looking for, and one in the future that you see yourself.
Interesting. Well, I think one in the past would be it's the time when I, more or less had made up my mind that I don't want to pursue a career in academia. And, it was the very early days of the side project that ended up being Polybee, right? I think that
Hmm.
whole phase of exploration was um, just so much fun. I still have great memories of it. It was just me doing it, right? It just started teaching me so much already, and it continues to do so today. So certainly that whole, I'd say, second half of 2018 where I started doing this transition was quite remarkable and will certainly be, one of the most critical and also memorable times in my career. What I'm hoping for now or looking for, let's say, now is, yeah, I think I kind of mentioned it a while ago, but it would be getting to product market fit. I think we've really positioned ourselves well for it as a company, where we know exactly what's the product to be built, who for. We just now need to prove it repeatedly to our customers and get them to come back for it, every season, and
Mm.
get them to, you know, pay a price which has positive unit economics for us, and that's when we know that we are really onto something. So that's what I'm hoping for in the near future, and well, in the distant future, yeah, I'd like to sort of build a machine that creates value,
Mhm.
and that just comes down to having the right organization, the right people in it who are empowered, who are as passionate, and who have as much ownership of what they do as anyone else would have. That basically would be a test of my leadership skills.
Mhm.
Um, but that's what I'd like to. transform into is a business leader who managed to build that machine which creates value
Hmm.
on its own. So it's not exactly a spotlight moment, but I think once you get
Right.
to a point where products are being built from ground up
That's the sort
and
of
we
next phase, yeah. Next phase in
exactly,
business, yeah.
exactly. So that's where we'd like to be in the next few years. So yeah, that's how I would kind of position the three key pivotal moments, or rather phases, in my professional journey.
I I will come back to the word resilience because that's what your past talks about. It just shows that how resilient you were throughout this journey, and looking at the aspirations that you have, it just shows your ambition and your willingness to evolve and adapt. Commendable, and quite inspiring, to be honest. I can only wish you all the luck, and all my best wishes are with you on this journey. And I'm happy to see so far how you have evolved in your journey, but I'm also really excited to see where you go from here. And I'm sure you will be reaching the skies with bright colors. I have no doubt about that. So I'm really looking forward to your journey in
Thanks a
future.
lot, Tanmay. It's been a huge pleasure catching up, and walking you through my journey so far. And absolutely, we should do this again. And I wish you luck on your journey too.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Sid, for taking your time and giving us insights into your journey, sharing your energy with us. We are all walking away with spirits lifted for sure. My spirit is lifted after listening to your journey, and I'm very, very happy that we could have this conversation. It has been wonderful, delightful. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
And that's a wrap for this episode of Unboxing Stories Professional Spotlight Series. I hope you found today's discussion as inspiring and insightful as I did. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, rate, and leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. Your feedback keeps our passion alive and helps us reach more incredible listeners like you. Thanks for listening. I'm Tanmay K, and I look forward to having you join us again for our next episode, where we will feature another fascinating professional. Until then, keep striving, keep thriving, and keep unboxing your story.